gentleman standing to my right may well need no introduction. Phil Parker is, of course, a writer on the BRM magazine, but in addition, he holds the editorship of Garden Rail, which for those of us that like the slightly larger gauge, is a fascinating read. We'll be getting to the magazine shortly, but without more ado, it's my pleasure to hand over to Mr. Phil Parker.
Okay, thank you. I'm tempted to go, hello, London, and the rest of the world. Is the Zoom working now?
Yeah.
That's good, right. As is, looks good to me. Right, thanks for coming along. And as Lawrence says, my name's Phil Parker, and I write for Toy Train magazines, and more importantly, for tonight, I edit Garden Rail magazine, the best magazine on the newsstand. So what they've actually asked me to do is come along and talk about garden railways. So the first obvious question is, why doesn't the clicker work? Next slide, please. Yes.
No, next slide, please.
No, that's his mouse. That's his mouse pointer. It worked a minute ago.
Yeah, yes, it was working. Try that.
Aha! Yeah, it works. Right, leave it alone. Don't break it now. So, if I'm going to talk about garden railways, I think the first thing we need to do is actually define what a garden railway is. And I'm going to say this is the definition of garden railway as applies to Garden Rail magazine. The thing is that basically a garden railway can be any railway you put out in the garden. But I have to be sensible. Warner's has a fine collection of magazines. We have, as modelling magazines go, we have British Air Modelling, which covers all the indoor stuff and a little bit of, we do occasionally sniff at outdoors. And we have Engineering in Miniature, which deals with the big, heavy, proper engineering stuff that's beyond my ability. Garden Rail, as far as I'm concerned, will be scales that are generally either 16mm to the foot, running on 32mm gauge track, or G scale, which will be running on 45mm track, or gauge 1 running on 45mm track, or gauge 3 running on 2.5-inch gauge track. Basically, it will be the big trains that aren't engineering stuff. You don't need a lathe for any of this stuff. Now, we've got the Ranger sizes there. This is, Lawrence has handily lent me a prop. This is a G gauge tram loco from LGB. And one of the interesting factors about LGB is that everything runs on 45mm track, which means they use an elastic ruler to do it. So just because LGB do not worry about things like consistent scales, and actually, to be fair, a lot of the garden rail people aren't that fussed. We're not like the P4 guys where we're panicking about every last millimetre. So you can have this Tyrolean tram running on 45mm gauge. LGB's also do an ICE train set that runs on 45mm gauge. They do it, they sell it, they do American diesels, they do all sorts. The most important thing to remember, though, is if you look at a narrow gauge railway, really, you often see that the stock is all slightly different sizes. The roof lines aren't consistent. And so that tends to be the way that we approach it in the garden railway scales. If it looks right, it is right. If you're happy, then you're doing it right. Clicker's not working again. Next slide, please.
Why this technology? Try that.
No. Okay, so next slide, if we ever see it, we'll say, so it's scary expensive then, because you tend to assume that something like this is going to be terrifyingly expensive. Aha, look at that, it worked. Right, it doesn't have to be. Garden railways are available to all. And I thought, right, let's get over the whole expense thing. Let's tell you my story of how I got into garden railways. This is my first attempt at garden railways. My mum surprised my dad and I one Christmas with a kit for a Mammoth steam locomotive. And we built it, and you could build it to gauge 1 or 32 mil gauge. We decided 32 mil gauge because if you ever built one of those kits, to build it to gauge 1, there's an awful lot of slightly odd packing behind the cylinders to push them out to the right size and everything like that. And that looked a bit odd to us. And we thought 32 mil gauge, O gauge, as you might call it, would be much more sensible. It would look like a narrow gauge locomotive. And we built the locomotive. And then I got into building a little bit of stock, which I'll come back to in a little while. The problem with the Mammoth, and certainly this is one of the very early Mammoth kits with the solid fuel heating and everything like that, is they don't have many speeds. They have stop and they have fast, and there's not a lot of control in the basic kit beyond that. Now, my mum didn't know this. I didn't know this. None of us knew this because actually this will have been in the early 90s. This would have been probably 1985, 1986. We didn't know that much about garden railways. So she bought a steam locomotive, and we thoroughly enjoyed putting it together and getting it running, but controllability was not it. Anyway, this was the first attempt at a garden railway. We have a very long garden. It's about 120 feet long, quite narrow. So the idea we thought was that what we do is we take the garden railway off down the garden on some Pico SM32 track, and it would come round and it'd come back the other side. And there were a few issues with that. The first is that Mammoths, they may be fast, they're not strong. So the first thing you have to do is make sure your track's nice and level. The garden dips, so gradually it was sitting on a viaduct effectively as it went off down the garden. And Pico track wasn't cheap even then. Good stuff, still good stuff. I've still got it, but it wasn't cheap even then. So basically the whole thing, the idea of going off down the garden and coming back in a loop and everything like the garden railways we'd see in the August issue of the Rail Modeler and that sort of thing, that was just far too ambitious for us. We didn't have the money, the time, or the commitment to do that sort of thing. However, we did learn quite a lot from it. This was the station at the top. And this station here, again, there was a lot less available in those days. And quite frankly, I didn't know what was available because the magazines and that sort of thing were very small publications, like from people like Merlin. They were, you just didn't know what was available. So this station building, I built this myself. And what it comes back to is the one thing I had was no money at this point. I had no money. I didn't have a job. I was still, I hadn't done my O-levels at that point. I was still, and the idea of spending a fortune wasn't on. This is made using what's called a castle master set. Essentially, you cast your own concrete blocks, and then you stick them together and you make the roof. And I made the roof with, I think that's plastic card, it's wood with plastic slates on it that I cut individually. And it was all a little tenuous how it held together, but it was a station building and I was proud of it and I'd made it and it hadn't cost too much money and it lasted very well until some cousins came around and tried to lift the roof off and then it was broken. But this was the far end of the line and the idea was that gradually we would expand the line and this would be much like the prototype. It would start off with a very simple station and gradually we would expand the station with some point work and that sort of thing. Never happened. We moved on to doing something else. However, the locomotive itself is interesting. This is Tiger. This is my first ever scratch-built locomotive. This is what you do when you've got very, very, very little money and still want to build a locomotive, and you actually like making things. I've always loved making things. I'm into this hobby for making stuff. And so I built this. I've still got it. It's, those who've ever if you've ever been in a Zoom call with me, it's sat on the shelf behind me in a Zoom call. Tiger is of no recognisable parentage, even though it says Hunslet on the front. It says Hunslet on the front because that's the easiest word to write with a paintbrush. It's made of plastic cards and the running gear is a square brass tube rectangle with some Coopercraft running gear, because that Coopercraft made some wagons, which are appeared in some of the photos. They made some very nice plastic wagons. They also did the running gear as a separate set. Right, that gave me wheels. Motor's a cheapy one, and the gears are from the Proops pound range. If anybody remembers the Proops pound ranges, there was all sorts of good stuff in there, including a camera, amazingly. I don't know where the camera went, but I think I've still got a set of the gears somewhere. Anyway, Tiger runs. When I say Tiger runs, Tiger moves very, very slowly. Keeps going, plenty of torque, keeps going, great. But there are obviously limitations. Powered by some I think they're AA batteries under there, and with a simple on-off forward reverse switch sticking out the side. It was very, very basic, but I built it at a plasticard, and I loved it, and I was proud of it. And this was my locomotive, okay? And so actually, Tiger did the bulk of the thing. One Christmas, I was purchased a sulfur models kit. Now, sulfur models are wonderful, wonderful kits. But when we say kit, what we actually mean is you get some white metal components and a drawing. And you cut the bits out of using the drawing, and you glue them together. And this is an attractive loco. I've still got this one. Eccles still exists. Has been refurbished recently. I've replaced the battery box that goes in the front end. Again, plasticard construction, white metal bits. Salford did quite a range of these. Brian Clark is still around. He's still active in the 16mm world. Sadly, the kits are no longer available. If they turn up on eBay or whatever, they go for absolutely stupid money. But they're worth nothing. So if anybody's got a Groudle Glen 016.5 set, they're worth 20 quid. I'll give you 30 for it. But no, seriously, they go together. But when we say kit, it's actually it's something that's not uncommon in the model boat world. Essentially, you get a plan, you cut the bits out yourself, and then you build it. Very, very nice castings. And Brian did a huge range of locomotives, all of this sort of thing, all designed to be battery powered, cheapo motor, and running on O-gauge track. This is the second layout. Runs around a pond in the back garden. That seemed more sensible to go round in a circle, because then we could at least run the locomotives and we didn't have to chase up and down the garden after them. That's quite an important consideration, exactly how you're going to run the things. You can see a bit more of the pond layout here, and some more of my cheapo bodgery. Years ago, there was a thing in the 16mm world called stomper building. Stompers were little battery-powered cars that were relatively cheap, but you've got a four-wheel drive chassis, pull all the wheels off, pull the body off, left yourself with the guts, put some wheels on it, and you could build yourself a locomotive. What the Americans would call a critter. You could build yourself a locomotive. It had zero control or anything like the pesky control or that sort of thing, but you could at least build something that moved. At the same time, I discovered that my local model shop, the Train Shop in Warwick, now a fish and chip shop, they would sell me an O-gauge plastic wheel, an O-scale plastic wheel, because you didn't get an axle, for 20p. I could afford 20p wheels, so that tram is built on 20p wheels. In fact, all of that stock is sat on 20p plastic wheels. The flanges are far too fine, unfortunately, really, for 16mm stuff. You want chunkier flanges, but that lot cost me very, very little to do, and I enjoyed building it. The tram is plasticard. The coach behind it is wood framed with plasticard backing, I think clear plastic, and I've painted the green panels. An idea I think I got from Scale Trains, where they did something similar with a signal box back in the 80s. The coach behind it is all wood. I like making things out of wood. I'm not very good at it, but I do love making things out of wood. And so the coach actually is the body. There was originally be the body of the tram, and then I decided I didn't like the way it was turning out, so I turned it into a coach. That lot, there's probably about £5 worth of materials in that lot there, and that kind of sums up my approach to garden railways. Essentially, I was doing it on the cheap, but making stuff, getting my hands dirty and making things. A little more sophisticated. This is Ben Ben was inspired by my friend Anthony Cools, who some of you will know, who had a steam loco, and he took it to one of our one of our members who got an O gauge line that ran round his shed one evening, and we played with it. And I was really impressed that he was working it in the cab and everything like that. And I thought that looks nice, but the steam, I can't build a steam loco, and also it's just a faff. I'm not actually a big steam man because I firmly believe that sometimes you just need battery electric because it can just get you going and you can just switch it on and play and not worry about it. I have the same issue with model boats. So I do the same thing. But what I did like the idea was I liked the idea that I would have a regulator in the cab. So Ben, using a little circuit with some diodes in, has a regulator in the cab and you drive it with the regulator. It runs on glass-filled nylon wheels, which I discovered some cheapo wheels that I could use. Again, on the Proust pound pack motor gearbox. The body and most of it is made of plasticard. It is based on the advert for a backwards 009 kit that used to appear in the Ram Modeler every month. And I drooled over. Really love the look of this loco. I now actually own one. I managed to buy one off the 009 Association, but I really love the look of the loco. I couldn't afford to buy the kit, so I built myself one in 16mm for hardly any money. And again, plastic card bits. I think it's got a roundhouse chimney, which I think is available to spare. But basically, it works. And then probably the final one of my cheapo locos. This you may recognise from some Festiniog stuff and possibly even some Audrey books. This is probably the ultimate of me experimenting. And I think the key to this is I experimented. I had to go. I would try different things. I would try different ideas. And I think because it's in 16mm and it's bigger and it's chunkier, you don't need to be an engineer. So this loco runs, and I say runs very, very loosely in the sense it's sort of lumbered along the track a little bit. It never worked properly, but it runs on wheels cast from Isopon car body filler. We had a Talbot Solara. I was very familiar with Isopon car body filler because my parents had this car, and I used to spend a lot of time replacing the wings with it with gradually larger amounts of Isopon car body filler. So I made some wheels out of Isopon. I didn't know if it would work, but I had a go. I made myself a mold. I can't remember how I made the mold, to be honest, but I made a mold and I cast myself some wheels. The tender wheels are bits of plastic pipe with a plasticard flange on the face and a plasticard face. They're coarse beyond belief, but they did actually stay on. Now, oh, and the body is mostly Dailyboard cardboard, except for the tank, which is a Coca-Cola can, cut and then rebent. Now, you might say to yourself, that's strange, but April this year, this is the same prototype built by a guy called Ben Bucky, who is an artist come model maker, and we published this in Garden Rail. This loco sits on one of those cheap, horrible chassis that you get at a sort of Christmassy train sets that are all gaudy and horrible. But he's just taken that and he's built a new loco on top of it. You will notice the interestingly coloured chimney. Boston Lodge are currently taking this idea and painting the loco with that. It's going to look lovely when it's out. But you can see what Ben's done is he's used plastic card, but those handrails, they're off the horrible American loco. The handrail knobs, they're off it. Where he needs handrail tops, he's used pins. It's running on a cheapo rubbish chassis, but it's the ethos of Garden Railways for me, is this sort of very much like the real thing. It's that sort of make, do and mend approach to building your stock. Nothing has to be perfect. It all be a little bit ramshackle, and that just adds to the character of the whole thing. Anyway, to be honest, there is a slight problem with Garden Railways. You have to maintain them. And I mean, you can see that our line was screwed onto wooden posts, nailed, bashed into the earth. Lovely, but you have to maintain them. The ballast falls away. And I think the biggest problem with the Pico track is that nickel silver expands in the heat and then contracts, and it moves. If you lay your entire circuit with flexi-track, the chances are it will disconnect, or at least that's what we found, if the track moves around. So gradually, the line just got to the stage of it was just more trouble to maintain than we're willing to put in. By this point, we were doing, we'd started building, my dad and I started building exhibition layouts in 00, and we were doing more of that sort of thing. The garden line was eventually taken up. The track is still stored. I still have it all, and it's still fine-ish. Earlier Pico stuff, sometimes there was a bit of an issue with UV light on the sleepers. That hasn't been a problem for decades. The sleepers don't go brittle anymore, but the rail's still fine. So at some point, one day the 32 mil line will reappear. Anyway, so basically this is what happened. It all got packed away, and although not completely packed away, as I'll show you in a minute, and we moved on, did other things. What goes back into it was a trip to the Isle of Man back in 1993, and absolutely falling in love with the Isle of Man. I love everything about the Isle of Man. I love the locos. I love the Gravel Glen Railway, which is technically the best railway in the world, no arguments. I love the people. I like I like the scenery. It's a wonderful place. And the Garden Railway world had moved on. There was manufacturing in China all of a sudden, and things like this started to appear. Now, this is an electric powered I'm not going to say it's G-scale. It runs on 45 mil track, but of course it's pretending to be 3-foot gauge stuff. There is a horrible nomenclature to it, and I can't remember what it is. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We love these. My dad and I love these. Money wasn't such a problem, which is good when the first one of these cost 800 quid, and I think the last one cost 1,200 quid, which is a lot of money for a toy train. I mean, it's a big toy train. It's a beautiful toy train, but it is a lot of money. Now, Lawrence has actually made the point actually about his tram here. These things, the beauty of them is it's a big lump for display. That lives in a display case in the living room, okay, with 3 others. And it lives there because it is beautiful to look at. And undeniably, it's a stunning looking loco, beautiful bit of kit. And we bought those really with no real thought of where they were going to run. There was a lot of saving up. There was a lot of selling off old tat and that sort of thing to afford these. It's no little bill, but we loved them. And then kind of we wanted somewhere for them to run. And so the Garden Railway comes back out again. The pond is still there. It's in the middle of the green things growing out of it. Okay, the pond is there, but I taught myself how to bricklay, ish. It's not beautiful, but it works, it does the job. And so we built a raised bank. I'm going to come back to raised banks in a bit. Built a raised bank, the intention being to run a circuit of LGB track around it. Proper thought about how you're going to do this nowadays. Now, blocks set into the earth and everything leveled up. The track runs on a basically the track runs on a series of breeze blocks laid horizontally around the under the track bed. It's heavy work. This is the thing about garden railways is you invariably end up with some heavy work on here because you're lugging around quantities of gravel and sand and soil and that sort of thing. But if you do it properly, you don't have to do it again. And to be fair, this track bed has not moved. Lots of other issues, but the track bed has not moved, which is pretty good because it was hard work putting it in there. The thing is, you do this properly because if you're ever on a loco that's cost 1,200 quid on it, you're going to put the track on properly this time because when Tiger falls off an SM32 bit of track, it's not the end of the world. The mammoth is just going to fall off and it'll set fire to the grass and that sort of thing. It's not the end of the world. 1,200 quid for the loco, it's staying on the rails. Thank you very much. And we gradually started laying it. This is our test loco, Oho, and he is an LGB junior Sept test loco, along with the rest of his trainer. We'll come back to him later. It is the LGB Stangs. There are a million of those. If anybody's seen trying TT brake vans and knows that there are more trying TT brake vans than there are people on the planet, then LGB Stangs about the same sort of thing. There are lots and lots of these at various different levels of detail, but they're a good solid locomotive. They're well made and they will keep running. And if they fall off, you're not like, I'm using the toy train version. If it falls off, you're not going to damage anything. Okay, so it's an excellent test loco from that point of view. And we've laid it with LGB second radius curves because the peacocks won't go round anything tighter than that. And gradually, you know, we built something that approximated to be a finished layout. And I mean, no model railway is ever properly finished, but this is something that looks like a finished layout. I mean, this platform is cast concrete. You can stand on it. I can stand on it. I'm a fat bloke. It doesn't do it any harm. The track actually does need reballasting. It doesn't look as good as this at the moment. We're refurbishing it and doing some work on the electrics and that sort of thing. But what you've got is you've got an attractive thing in the garden. And this is the key to garden railways. If you're going to build a garden railway, it needs to look nice in the garden. You can't hide it. The family can't shut the door on Dad's mess of a layout. It's going to be in the garden and it's got to look nice. But they do look nice. They do look nice. You get an attractive scene, and people who are not enthusiasts will still appreciate the garden railway and the look of the garden railway and how it sort of fits in with the rest of the garden. So, you know, a good garden railway will enhance your garden, but it does mean you've got to put a bit of effort into building the thing and making it look nice. Our internet connection is unstable now. However,